Staff Sergeant had seen his share of military hospitals, but the forward operating base medical facility in Afghanistan felt different. The constant hum of generators mixed with distant artillery created an atmosphere of controlled chaos that even seasoned warriors found unsettling. As he limped through the entrance, his leg still aching from the shrapnel wound that had landed him here 3 days ago, couldn't help but notice the efficiency of the medical staff rushing between beds. The ward buzzed with activity as wounded soldiers from various units received treatment. Some were reading, others sleeping, and a few were engaged in quiet conversations with visiting comrades. Had initially resisted coming here, preferring to tough it out at his unit's smaller aid station, but his commanding officer had insisted after the wound showed signs of infection. Near the supply station, he spotted her for the first time. She appeared to be in her late 20s, with auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun and focused green eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She wore standard medical fatigues with a small red cross patch, and she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent considerable time in field hospitals. What struck immediately was how she seemed almost too composed for someone he assumed was probably fresh out of medical training. "You must be Sergeant," she said, approaching with a clipboard in hand. Her voice carried a slight southern accent, warm but professional. "I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell. I'll be overseeing your care while you're with us." Straightened slightly, surprised by her rank designation. "Doctor, you look pretty young to be running a ward like this." Sarah smiled, an expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I get that a lot, but don't worry, Sergeant. I've been doing this longer than you might think." She glanced at his chart, then back at his face. "SEAL Team 6, right? That's impressive." "Yes, ma'am, though I'm hopping to get back to my unit as soon as possible. This infection thing has me sidelined when my team needs me most." "I understand the urgency, but rushing back too soon could make things worse. We need to make sure that wound heals properly." She made a note on her clipboard. "I've seen too many warriors end up with permanent damage because they pushed themselves too hard, too fast." As they talked, found himself studying her mannerisms. There was something about the way she carried herself that seemed different from other medical personnel he'd encountered. She had the bearing of someone who understood combat, not just its aftermath. Her hands, though gentle when she examined his wound, showed small scars that looked like they came from more than just medical training accidents. "Have you been deployed long, Doc?" he asked as she changed his bandages. "This rotation, about 8 months, but I've done several tours in various locations." She worked with practiced precision, her movements economical and purposeful. "What about you? How long have you been in country?" 6 months this time, 3rd deployment to Afghanistan." Watched her technique, nodding how she seemed to anticipate his pain responses before he felt them. "You're pretty good at this. Most medics take a while to develop that kind of touch." Sarah paused for just a moment, something flickering across her face. "Experience teaches you to read people quickly out here. Pain, fear, determination, they all show up in different ways." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another patient, a young Army specialist who had been brought in with multiple gunshot wounds. Watched as Sarah immediately shifted into what could only be described as command mode. She directed the nursing staff with authority that went beyond her medical rank, coordinating treatment with the kind of tactical awareness that typically came from field experience. "Interesting," thought to himself. "She's definitely not your typical hospital doctor." Over the next 2 days, had plenty of opportunity to observe Sarah's interactions with other patients and staff. She seemed to know everyone's background, remembering personal details about families and military specialties that went well beyond what would be noted in medical files. More importantly, she had an uncanny ability to relate to the combat veterans under her care in ways that suggested personal understanding rather than academic knowledge. During one particularly difficult night, when a helicopter brought in multiple casualties from a roadside bomb attack, watched Sarah work for nearly 18 straight hours. She moved between patients with stamina that impressed even him, making critical decisions under pressure while maintaining the kind of calm focus he recognized from his own combat experience. "She's definitely seen action before," he mentioned to Corporal, his bunkmate in the ward. "No way she developed that kind of composure just from medical school." A Marine with 2 Purple Hearts nodded in agreement. "Yeah, I noticed that too. Plus, did you see how she handled that panic attack yesterday? She talked that kid down like someone who's been there herself." What really caught attention was an incident on his fourth day in the ward. A new patient, clearly suffering from severe PTSD, became agitated and potentially violent when staff tried to examine his wounds. While other medical personnel stepped back and called for security, Sarah approached the distressed soldier directly. "Hey there, warrior," she said in a voice that was simultaneously authoritative and compassionate. "I know that feeling, the walls closing in, heart racing, feeling like you need to fight your way out of here." The soldier, a Special Forces sergeant with haunted eyes, looked at her with surprise. "You don't know anything about it, lady. You sit here safe in your hospital while we're out there getting blown up." "You're right about one thing," Sarah replied, never breaking eye contact. "I am here in this hospital, but safe. That's debatable. And as for not knowing what it's like out there," she rolled up her sleeve, revealing a scar that immediately recognized as being from a close-range gunshot wound. "Trust me when I say I understand exactly what you're going through." The transformation in the soldier's demeanor was immediate. Whatever he saw in her eyes, whatever he heard in her voice, convinced him that she truly did understand. Within minutes, she had him calmed down and cooperating with treatment. Found himself increasingly curious about Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Her medical skills were obviously exceptional, but there were too many signs pointing to a military background that went beyond medical training. The way she moved through the ward showed tactical awareness. Her knowledge of weapons and combat terminology was too detailed for someone who had only studied it academically. Most telling was her ability to connect with combat veterans in ways that suggested shared experience rather than clinical training. That evening, as Sarah made her rounds checking on patients before the night shift took over, decided to test his growing suspicions. "Doc, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Sergeant. What's on your mind?" "That scar on your arm, where'd you get it?" Sarah's expression became more guarded. Occupational hazard, medical personnel aren't always as safe as people assume. "Right, and I suppose you learned all that weapons terminology from medical textbooks, too." She studied his face for a long moment. "You're pretty observant for someone who's supposed to be focusing on recovery." "Comes with the job, so does recognizing when someone has skills that go beyond their current assignment." Kept his tone casual, but his eyes were serious. "I'm not trying to pry into classified information, Doc. I'm just curious about the person who's been taking such good care of us." Sarah sat down in the chair next to his bed, clearly weighing her response. "Let's just say my path to medicine wasn't entirely conventional. I've worn different uniforms and had different responsibilities at various points in my career." Before could respond, the conversation was interrupted by shouting from outside the medical facility. Through the windows, they could see soldiers running toward defensive positions. The base's alert system began broadcasting warnings about incoming threats. "Looks like we might have company," Sarah said, her entire demeanor shifting into something hadn't seen before. Gone was the compassionate doctor, replaced by someone who looked ready for combat. And in that moment, realized that whatever Dr. Sarah Mitchell's background really was, he was about to find out exactly what she was capable of when the chips were down. The base alarm continued its urgent wailing as Sarah moved with purpose toward the supply closet. Watched in amazement as she pulled out what appeared to be a go bag that definitely wasn't standard medical equipment. From it, she tactical gear that looked well used and carefully maintained. "Doc, what exactly are you doing?" asked, though part of him was beginning to understand. "My job," she replied simply, strapping on body armor with movements that spoke of countless repetitions, "which sometimes involves more than treating patients." Through the windows, could see muzzle flashes in the distance. The attack was coming from the eastern perimeter, where intelligence had suggested insurgent activity for the past week. What worried him most was the intensity of the gunfire. This wasn't a probe or harassment attack. Someone was mounting a serious assault on the base. "All medical personnel to secure positions," came the announcement over the intercom. "Prepare for possible casualties and facility defense." Sarah finished gearing up and turned to address the room full of wounded soldiers. "Listen up, everyone. We're going into lockdown procedures. Those who can move need to help those who can't. We're going to get through this together." Struggled to sit up. "Doc, with respect, shouldn't you be taking cover with the other medical staff?" "Under normal circumstances, yes." Sarah checked her sidearm with professional efficiency. "But these aren't normal circumstances, and I'm not exactly normal medical staff. Before could ask what she meant, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in moments later, bathing the ward in an eerie red glow. In the distance, explosions echoed across the base, growing closer with each blast. "They're targeting infrastructure," Sarah observed, moving to the window. "Power grid first, then communications, then they'll try to breach the perimeter." She spoke with the tactical understanding of someone who had planned similar operations. Corporal looked at her with confusion. "How do you know their attack pattern, ma'am?" "Because it's what I would do," she replied without hesitation. The radio crackled to life with frantic communications from the base defense team. "Medical facility, this is command. We're tracking a separate force moving toward your location. Estimate 20 to 30 hostiles attempting to flank our main defensive line. Your security detail has been redirected to support perimeter defense." Felt his stomach drop. The medical facility was now essentially undefended except for wounded soldiers and medical staff. "Doc, we need to evacuate the patients who can be moved." "Negative." Sarah's voice had taken on a command authority that found both surprising and oddly reassuring. "Moving wounded soldiers in the dark with hostiles in the area is suicide. We defend this position." "With respect, ma'am, most of us are in no condition to fight, and medical personnel aren't trained for combat." Sarah turned to face him, and in the red emergency lighting, her expression was unlike anything he'd seen from her before. "Sergeant, I need you to trust me on this. Can you do that?" Something in her tone convinced him. "Yes, ma'am." "Good, here's what's going to happen. Anyone who can hold a weapon takes a defensive position. Those who can't will help coordinate communications and medical support for the mobile patients. We're going to turn this ward into a fortress." Over the next 20 minutes, watch Sarah transform the medical facility with tactical precision that would have impressed his own team leaders. She positioned the mobile patients at strategic points that provided overlapping fields of fire while maintaining protection for the seriously wounded. She established clear communication protocols and assigned specific responsibilities to everyone present. Most importantly, she seemed to know exactly where the attack would come from before it materialized. "They'll come through the east entrance first," she explained to and the other soldiers who could fight. "Small team, probably 4 or 5, trying to secure the building quietly. When that fails, they'll hit the main entrance with everything they have." "How can you possibly know that?" asked Sergeant, a ranger with a broken leg. "Because it's standard insurgent tactics for this type of target," Sarah replied, checking her rifle with practiced ease. "Medical facilities are high-value targets. They want to control the wounded, use them as leverage, or eliminate them to demoralize the defending force." Studied her weapon handling. She moved with the fluid competence of someone who had spent years training with firearms, not the basic familiarity that medical personnel typically received. "Doc, I think it's time you told us exactly what your background is." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then at the other soldiers who were staring at her with growing understanding. "Fair enough. Before medical school, I spent 8 years as a special operations medic. Rangers first, then Delta Force. 3 tour in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, plus classified operations I can't discuss." She chambered a round in her rifle. "I got out because I was tired of only being able to save people after they got hurt. I wanted to save more lives, so I became a doctor." The silence that followed was broken by Corporal. "So you're telling us that our doctor is actually special ops?" "Was special ops. Now I'm a doctor who happens to remember her previous training." Sarah moved to the window again, scanning the darkness outside. "And right now, that previous training is exactly what we need." Felt a mix of relief and concern. Having someone with Sarah's background in charge definitely improved their chances, but it also meant the situation was serious enough that a doctor felt the need to become a soldier again. "Movement on the east side," Sarah whispered, raising her weapon. 3 hostiles approaching the service entrance. They're trying to stay low, but their heat signatures are visible against the building." Squinted into the darkness, seeing nothing. "How can you tell?" "Night vision enhancement surgery," she replied matter-of-factly. "Delta had some experimental programs for improving operational capabilities." The first shots came exactly where and when Sarah had predicted. 3 insurgents attempted to breach the service entrance using what sounded like explosive charges. The blast was smaller than expected, suggesting they were trying to maintain stealth. "Remember," Sarah called out to the defending soldiers, "controlled fire. Make every shot count." We don't have unlimited ammunition, and we need to make this position too costly for them to continue the assault. The insurgents who came through the breached entrance moved with tactical precision, suggesting they were better trained than typical local fighters. Sarah engaged the lead attacker with surgical accuracy, her shots finding their mark even in the limited visibility of the emergency lighting. Despite his wounded leg, managed to position himself where he could provide covering fire for Sarah's position. As he watched her work, he realized that everything he thought he knew about Dr. Sarah Mitchell had been completely wrong. She wasn't just a doctor who had once been a soldier. She was a warrior who had chosen to become a healer, and when circumstances demanded it, both sides of her training came together in ways that were both impressive and slightly terrifying. The first wave of attackers was repelled, but Sarah's expression remained grim. "That was just the beginning," she warned the others. "They were testing our defenses, figuring out how many of us can actually fight. The real attack comes next." As if to confirm her words, the sound of vehicles approaching from multiple directions filled the air outside. Whatever was coming next, it was going to be much bigger than what they had just faced. Found himself in the unusual position of following the tactical leadership of someone he had initially dismissed as just another medical officer. As he checked his ammunition and prepared for the next assault, he couldn't help but wonder what other surprises Dr. Sarah Mitchell might have in store. The sound of diesel engines grew louder as Sarah moved between defensive positions, checking on each soldier's ammunition count and field of fire. Noticed that she seemed to be calculating something in her head, her eyes constantly moving between the windows and the strategic positions she had established throughout the ward. "2 vehicles minimum, possibly 3, she announced to the defending soldiers. "Based on engine signatures, I'd estimate we're looking at technical vehicles with mounted weapons plus dismounted infantry, probably 15 to 20 hostiles total." Sergeant adjusted his position behind an overturned bed frame. "Doc, how are you getting all this information from just engine sounds?" "Audio signature analysis was part of advanced reconnaissance training," Sarah replied, never taking her eyes off the approaches to the building. "Different engines, different threat profiles. Those sound like pickups with heavy modifications, standard platform for mounting crew-served weapons in this region." Was beginning to understand that Sarah's knowledge went far deeper than he had initially realized. "What kind of crew-served weapons should we expect?" "Probably PKM machine guns, maybe an RPG or 2, possibly a rifle if they're really serious about this assault." Sarah checked her watch. "They'll coordinate the attack with the main assault on the base perimeter. Maximum confusion, split the defending forces." The radio crackled again with updates from base command. The situation was deteriorating rapidly across multiple fronts. Enemy forces had breached the outer perimeter in 2 locations, and several key defensive positions had gone silent. The medical facility was now officially on its own. "Well, that settles it," Sarah said grimly. "No cavalry coming. We hold this position with what we have, or we don't hold it at all." She turned to address the entire ward. "Listen carefully, everyone. The people coming for us aren't interested in taking prisoners. They want to eliminate wounded soldiers and medical personnel to send a message. That means we fight with everything we have, and we don't give them an inch." Had been in enough combat situations to recognize the truth in her assessment. This wasn't a tactical engagement with rules of engagement and surrender protocols. This was survival. "Those of you who can't fight," Sarah continued, "your job is to keep the seriously wounded stable and ready to move if we have to fall back to a secondary position. Everyone else, we're going to make this the most expensive piece of real estate they've ever tried to take." The first explosion came without warning, shattering windows along the east wall as an RPG round impacted the building's exterior. The blast was followed immediately by sustained machine gun fire that chewed through the remaining glass and began tearing chunks out of the interior walls. "Down, everyone down," Sarah shouted, but noticed that even as she called for cover, she was moving toward the source of enemy fire rather than away from it. The machine gun fire was coming from a vehicle positioned about 200 meters from the main entrance. Through the smoke and debris, could see muzzle flashes from at least 3 different weapons. The sustained fire was clearly intended to suppress the defenders while dismounted infantry moved closer to assault the building. Sarah low-crawled to a position near the blown-out window, carefully observing the enemy positions. PKM machine gun on the lead vehicle. Small arms fire from concealed positions on the flanks. They're good, but they're following a predictable pattern. What do you mean? Called over the sound of incoming rounds. They're trying to pin us down with suppressive fire while flanking elements move into position for a coordinated assault. Textbook insurgent tactics. Sarah began making adjustments to her rifle scope. Problem is, it only works if the defenders react predictably. Watched in amazement as Sarah began what could only be described as counter-sniper operations. Her first shot eliminated the machine gunner on the lead vehicle, causing the sustained fire to cease momentarily. Her second shot took out what appeared to be a spotter or team leader, creating visible confusion among the attacking force. "How is she making those shots in this lighting?" Corporal whispered. "Enhanced vision and about 15 years of advanced marksmanship training," Sarah replied, never taking her eye off the scope. "Plus, they're not expecting return fire this accurate from a medical facility." The enemy adjusted their tactics quickly, using smoke grenades to obscure their approach while maintaining sporadic fire to keep the defenders suppressed. Sarah frowned as she watched the smoke billowing across their field of vision. "They learn fast. Whoever's commanding that unit has had professional training." She moved away from the window. "They're going to use the smoke to get dismounted infantry close enough for a direct assault. When they come through that smoke, they'll be moving fast and in formation." Checked his ammunition count, not enough for a sustained firefight. "How many rounds do you have, Doc?" "Enough," she replied grimly, "but we're going to need to be very selective about our targets." The next phase of the attack began with multiple grenades thrown through the broken windows. Sarah had anticipated this, having moved the wounded patients away from the exterior walls. The explosions filled the ward with smoke and debris, but caused fewer casualties than the attackers had probably hoped. "Here they come," Sarah announced, though couldn't see anything through the smoke and chaos. What happened next would be burned into his memory for the rest of his life. As enemy soldiers began pouring through the breached windows and doorways, Sarah seemed to transform into something beyond what he had thought humanly possible. She moved through the smoke-filled ward with lethal precision, engaging targets with a combination of firearms skills and close-quarters combat techniques that went far beyond anything had seen from special operations personnel. Her movements were economical and brutally efficient, eliminating threats with a kind of systematic thoroughness that spoke of extensive experience in exactly this type of fighting. "Contact left," called out as he spotted movement near the medical supply area. Sarah was already there, having somehow anticipated where the next threat would emerge. Her response was immediate and devastating, a controlled burst that eliminated 2 insurgents before they could bring their weapons to bear. Found himself struggling to keep up with Sarah's tactical awareness. She seemed to know where every enemy soldier was before they appeared, responding to threats with reaction times that seemed almost supernatural. "How is she doing this?" wondered aloud as he watched Sarah engage multiple targets simultaneously. "Training," replied, though he was beginning to suspect that Sarah's capabilities went beyond even the most advanced special operations programs he knew about. The assault continued for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 20 minutes. Wave after wave of insurgents attempted to breach the medical facility, only to be met by Sarah's devastating defensive fire and the supporting efforts of the wounded soldiers who could still fight. By the time the smoke began to clear, the ward looked like a war zone. Furniture was destroyed, medical equipment was scattered everywhere, and the walls were riddled with bullet holes. But somehow, impossibly, they had held their position. Did a quick count of the enemy casualties visible around the ward, at least 15, possibly more. All eliminated by a woman he had initially assumed was just a doctor with no combat experience. "Doc," he said quietly, "I think you might have undersold your background when you said you used to be special ops." Sarah was already moving among the wounded patients, checking for injuries from the assault while maintaining constant awareness of potential threats outside. "Sometimes the past is more complicated than simple service records indicate," she replied without elaboration, but was beginning to understand that whatever Sarah's real background was, he had just witnessed someone operating at a level that went far beyond normal special operations training. The question was whether this assault was over, or just the beginning of something much worse. Sarah moved through the aftermath of the assault with clinical efficiency, treating wounded patients while simultaneously maintaining security awareness that impressed even. She had somehow managed to keep every patient alive during the firefight, while eliminating what appeared to be an entire assault team. "Status report," she called out to the mobile defenders. "Has some shrapnel fragments, but nothing serious," responded. "Took a graze on his arm, everyone else is intact." Sarah nodded while applying pressure bandages to a patient who had been hit by debris. "Good, because that wasn't the main event." Paused in his ammunition count. "What do you mean?" "That was a probing attack with a secondary objective of eliminating wounded personnel. Professional, but not their primary force." Sarah moved to the window, scanning the surrounding area with eyes that seemed to see more than normal human vision should allow. "The real assault is still coming." As if summoned by her words, the radio crackled with increasingly urgent communications from base command. All units, multiple breaches confirmed on the main perimeter. Estimate 40 to 60 hostiles with heavy weapons moving towards central facilities. Medical facility, you are now designated as primary target. Repeat, primary target." Corporal looked around the destroyed ward. "Why would we be the primary target? We're just a bunch of wounded soldiers and medical staff." Sarah's expression was grim. "Because someone knows exactly who's in this building, and they want me specifically." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Studied Sarah's face, seeing something he hadn't noticed before, a wariness that went beyond normal combat awareness. "Doc, what aren't you telling us?" Sarah continued her surveillance of the outside approaches while answering. "My last deployment wasn't exactly medical duty. I was recalled for a classified operation targeting high-value insurgent leadership in this region. The mission was successful, but it made some very dangerous people very angry." Felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in his mind. "So this isn't random, they know you're here." "Intelligence suggests they've been tracking my assignment to this facility for weeks. Tonight's assault on the base is probably a cover for a very specific mission: eliminate me and anyone else in this building." Sarah turned from the window. "I'm sorry you all got caught up in this, but walking away isn't an option now." Sergeant checked his weapon. "So what's the plan, Doc?" "We make them pay a price so high that survivors will think twice about targeting medical facilities in the future." Sarah moved to her equipment bag, pulling out items that were definitely not standard medical supplies. "And we make sure every patient in this ward gets out alive." Watched her assemble what appeared to be an advanced communications device. "Who are you calling?" "Friends who owe me favors." Sarah spoke quickly into the device in what sounded like coded language. Caught fragments about extraction requirements and time constraints, but the technical terminology was beyond his understanding. The response came back in equally cryptic language, but Sarah's expression showed satisfaction. "Help is coming, but not for at least 30 minutes. We need to hold this position until then." 30 minutes, looked around the destroyed ward. Against how many? Intelligence estimates suggest 40 to 50 hostiles, plus whatever backup they have in reserve. Sarah began distributing ammunition from concealed supplies that hadn't known existed. Professional fighters with military training and significant motivation. Accepted the additional ammunition while studying Sarah's preparations. "Doc, I need to ask, what level of classification was your last mission?" "The kind where mission details never make it into official records." Sarah checked her rifle one final time. "The kind where people like me don't officially exist." The implications of that statement hung in the air as the sound of heavy vehicles approached from multiple directions. Through the broken windows, could see lights moving in tactical formation, not the random approach of insurgent fighters, but the coordinated movement of professional military units. "These aren't local insurgents," observed. "No, they're not. Foreign fighters with extensive training and equipment that shouldn't be available in this region." Sarah positioned herself at what appeared to be the optimal defensive position, which means this operation has backing from someone with serious resources. The attack began with a coordinated barrage of heavy weapons fire that far exceeded anything they had faced earlier. RPG rounds impacted the building in rapid succession, while machine gun fire from multiple positions created a devastating crossfire pattern designed to eliminate any possibility of effective defense. "They're not trying to capture the building," Sarah shouted over the explosions. They're trying to level it with us inside. Realized that this assault was fundamentally different from the earlier probing attacks. These attackers weren't interested in tactical advantage or minimizing their own casualties. They were willing to expend significant resources and personnel for the single objective of eliminating everyone in the medical facility. "Cover the wounded," Sarah commanded as debris rained down from the ceiling. "We're going to have to fight mobile." What followed was unlike any combat had ever experienced. Sarah seemed to anticipate every enemy movement, responding to threats that hadn't yet materialized while maintaining devastating accuracy even under the most chaotic conditions. She moved through the ward like a force of nature, engaging multiple targets simultaneously, while somehow managing to coordinate the limited defensive capabilities of the wounded soldiers under her command. Her tactical awareness was beyond anything had thought possible, as if she could see the entire battlefield from multiple perspectives simultaneously. "Contact rear," called out as enemy soldiers breached the back entrance. Sarah was already in motion, eliminating the threat before could even acquire the targets. Her response was immediate and overwhelming, suggesting combat reflexes that had been honed to levels beyond normal human capabilities. "How is she doing this?" wondered aloud as he watched Sarah engage what appeared to be an entire squad of enemy fighters single-handedly. Was beginning to understand that whatever programs Sarah had been involved with during her classified service, they had produced capabilities that went far beyond standard special operations training. Her physical performance, tactical awareness, and combat effectiveness suggested enhancement that was either technological or represented training methods beyond anything he had encountered. The assault continued with relentless intensity, but gradually began to notice that the enemy fire was becoming less coordinated. Sarah's defensive strategy was working. The attackers were taking such heavy casualties that their tactical cohesion was beginning to break down. "They're pulling back to regroup," Sarah observed, though couldn't detect any change in the intensity of incoming fire. "How can you tell?" "Audio signatures. They're conserving ammunition and shifting to longer-range engagement patterns." Sarah reloaded with movements that were almost too fast to follow. "They'll try one more coordinated assault, then withdraw if that fails." Checked his ammunition count, running dangerously low despite Sarah's additional supplies. "What if we don't have enough ammunition for one more assault?" Sarah smiled, an expression that was both reassuring and slightly unsettling. "Then we improvise." The final assault began with everything the enemy had left: concentrated fire from multiple heavy weapons, coordinated infantry assault from 3 different directions, and what appeared to be demolition charges intended to bring down the entire structure. But Sarah was ready for them, and what witnessed during those final minutes of combat would convince him that Dr. Sarah Mitchell was operating at a level that redefined his understanding of what human beings were capable of achieving. By the time the shooting stopped, 45 enemy soldiers lay dead around and inside the medical facility. Every patient under Sarah's protection was still alive, and finally understood that he had been completely wrong about who he was dealing with from the very beginning. In the sudden silence that followed the final gunshots, found himself staring at a scene that everything he thought he knew about combat. 45 enemy soldiers lay scattered around the medical facility, each eliminated with surgical precision by a woman he had initially assumed was just another doctor. Sarah moved through the aftermath with the same clinical efficiency she had shown during medical rounds, checking each fallen enemy to ensure they posed no further threat, while simultaneously assessing her patients for any injuries sustained during the final assault. "All patients accounted for," she reported, though wasn't sure who she was reporting to. "No friendly casualties during the engagement." Struggled to process what he had witnessed. "Doc, I've been in special operations for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just did." Sarah paused in her post-battle assessment, finally allowing exhaustion to show on her face for the first time. Sometimes necessity creates capabilities that weren't there before. "That's not an answer," said quietly. "What we just saw wasn't normal human performance." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of approaching helicopters filled the air. But instead of the familiar sound of military aircraft, these had the distinctive signature of civilian medical evacuation units. "Our ride is here," Sarah announced, moving to establish communications with the incoming aircraft. Watched through the broken windows as multiple helicopters landed outside the medical facility. The personnel who emerged weren't standard military medical teams. They moved with the same enhanced awareness and precision that Sarah had demonstrated. "Who are these people?" asked as the rescue team entered the ward. "Friends," Sarah replied simply. "People who understand that sometimes protecting lives requires capabilities beyond normal medical training." The evacuation proceeded with efficiency that impressed even. Every wounded soldier was assessed, treated, and prepared for transport with coordination that suggested extensive practice. More importantly, the rescue team treated Sarah with a deference that indicated she held significant authority within whatever organization they represented. As patients were loaded onto helicopters, found himself on the same aircraft as Sarah. The flight gave him an opportunity to ask questions that had been building throughout the night. "Dr. Mitchell," he began formally, "I think I deserve some answers." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then at the other wounded soldiers who were listening with obvious interest. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Starting with what kind of medical program produces someone who can eliminate 45 enemy soldiers while keeping every patient alive." Sarah smiled, but it was an expression that held shadows couldn't quite interpret. "It wasn't a medical program, Sergeant. Medical school came after." "After what?" "After a career that officially never existed with an organization that doesn't appear in any government directory." Sarah checked her watch, apparently calculating something. "Let's just say that some people are recruited for capabilities that go beyond normal human limitations." Felt a chill that had nothing to do with the helicopter's altitude. "Enhanced human capabilities. You're talking about experimental programs." "I'm talking about necessity. When conventional methods aren't sufficient to address unconventional threats, governments develop unconventional solutions." Sarah's expression became distant. "Some of us volunteered for programs that pushed the boundaries of human performance in exchange for the ability to protect people who couldn't protect themselves." Leaned forward despite his injuries. "What kind of enhancements?" "Physical performance optimization, enhanced sensory capabilities, accelerated decision-making processes, and tactical awareness beyond normal human limitations." Sarah enumerated the capabilities matter-of-factly. "Plus training in virtually every combat discipline and medical technique known to modern military science." Tried to process the implications. "How many people like you are there?" "Fewer than when the programs began. Enhancement comes with costs that not everyone can pay." Sarah's expression showed something that might have been grief. "I got out because I wanted to save lives instead of just taking them. Medicine seemed like a way to balance the equation." The helicopter began its descent toward what appeared to be a major military medical center, but noticed that the facility wasn't on any of the maps he knew. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere that has medical capabilities appropriate for treating people with unusual backgrounds." Sarah began gathering her equipment. "You'll receive the best care available anywhere, and your recovery will be complete and accelerated." "And then what?" "Then you go back to your unit with an interesting story that you'll never be able to tell anyone." Sarah looked directly at. "What happened tonight doesn't exist in official records. The assault never happened, the casualties don't exist in any database, and you never met anyone named Sarah Mitchell." Felt a mixture of frustration and understanding. "Classified beyond normal security levels." "Classified beyond any security levels that officially exist." Sarah stood as the helicopter touched down. "But unofficially, you'll know that there are people working behind the scenes to protect soldiers like you from threats you'll never hear about." As they disembarked, watched Sarah interact with the medical personnel at this mysterious facility. Everyone treated her with a combination of professional respect and something that looked like concern. Whatever organization she represented, it clearly valued her abilities highly. "Sergeant," Sarah called as he was being transferred to a medical gurney. "Your leg will heal completely. No permanent damage, full restoration of function. You'll be back with your unit within 2 weeks." "How can you guarantee that?" "Because the medical technology here is about 20 years ahead of anything you've encountered." Sarah smiled genuinely for the first time since he'd met her. "Consider it a small compensation for getting caught up in something that wasn't supposed to involve you." As was wheeled into the medical facility, he caught a glimpse of Sarah speaking with several individuals who clearly held authority positions within whatever organization this was. The conversation appeared intense, with multiple references to operational parameters and threat assessments. Later, during his accelerated recovery process, would learn that the assault on the forward operating base had been officially attributed to equipment failures and training accidents. No enemy casualties were reported, no assault was acknowledged, and no record existed of Dr. Sarah Mitchell's presence at the facility. But would never forget what he had witnessed. He had seen someone transcend normal human limitations in service of protecting others, operating at levels of capability that redefined his understanding of what was possible. When he eventually returned to his unit, fully healed and ready for duty, carried with him the knowledge that somewhere in the world, there were individuals working beyond the boundaries of normal military operations to address threats that conventional forces couldn't handle. He never saw Sarah Mitchell again, but occasionally he would hear whispered stories from other special operations personnel about mysterious medical personnel who appeared during the most dangerous situations, saving lives through methods that went beyond normal medical training. And would smile, knowing that somewhere out there, a woman who had chosen to save lives instead of just taking them continued her work, protecting people who would never know how close they had come to dangers beyond their imagination. The official story would record that Sargent had recovered from routine injuries sustained during normal operations, but knew better. He had witnessed something extraordinary, and that knowledge would stay with him for the rest of his career, a reminder that heroes sometimes came in forms that no one expected, and that the most important battles were often fought by people whose names would never appear in any official record.